I won $8.7 million in the lottery and decided to keep it a secret until Thanksgiving, but a week before my mom told me, "You had nothing to be thankful for this year, stay away so you don't bring shame." A few days later, I posted a photo that made her regret every single word. Then my phone exploded, 36 missed calls. My name's Jenna Whittaker, I'm 31 years old. I was standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights of a gas station on a Tuesday night, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and gasoline. I'd bought the lottery ticket on a whim, a little piece of paper to break up the monotony of a long marketing project. Now I held it under the scanner, my heart thumping a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The machine beeped and a message flashed on the small screen. It was a big one. The clerk, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, glanced at the screen, then at me, his eyes wide. He told me I'd have to go to the state office to claim it. I nodded, my face a perfect mask of calm. I walked out to my car like I'd just bought a soda and a bag of chips. I drove home in my old Toyota, the one with the check engine light that blinked on and off whenever it wanted a bit of attention, like a needy pet. The winning ticket, worth approximately $8. $7 million after the lump sum and taxes, was tucked into my wallet. At home, I slid it into a Ziploc bag and hid it under a shoebox full of old winter scarves in the back of my closet. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text, didn't post, didn't even whisper it to the walls of my apartment. I made a pot of tea and sat in my worn armchair watching the city lights flicker outside my window. It was in that quiet moment that I made a decision. I wasn't telling my family, not yet, maybe not ever. For years, I'd been their safety net, their emergency fund, their solution. My first goal was simple. Stay quiet, watch, and see who they really were when I was no longer a walking wallet. I promised myself a single, unbreakable rule: no big purchases, no sudden moves, no leaks, just silence. The next morning, I used a personal day from work so no one would ask any questions and found an attorney. Her name was Monica Price, a sharp woman with kind eyes who listened without judgment as I laid out my strange request. I didn't want to invest or celebrate, I wanted to hide. Monica's rules were simple and aligned perfectly with my own. First, she said, leaning forward in her leather chair, change nothing for a while. Your car, your apartment, your job, keep it all exactly as it is. I nodded. Second, no social media hints, no pictures of fancy dinners, no vague posts about blessings, nothing, I agreed. And third, she concluded, her voice firm, document everything, every phone call, every text, every request for money. Dates, times, amounts, exact words, we build a record. That afternoon, I bought a blue accordion folder from a corner store and wrote one word on the tab in black marker. Proof. It felt solid in my hands, a container for the truth. That night, I set my phone to do not disturb after 9 p.m., a luxury I'd never allowed myself before. Silence became my second rule. I made my morning coffee in my old chipped white mug, the one with the faded forget-me-nots painted on the side. It was my anchor, a small, tangible piece of my old life that I held onto as this new, enormous reality settled around me. The blue-proof folder sat on my desk, waiting. The silence on my phone felt like a shield. I kept my old apartment with its squeaky floorboards, my same steady marketing job, and my usual grocery list. I was the same Jenna on the outside, but on the inside I was a scientist, and my family was about to become my case study. At Sunday dinner a few weeks later, the experiment was in full swing. The air was thick with the scent of pot roast and my mom's carefully crafted guilt. She stood at the head of the table, carving the meat while delivering one of her classic speeches about family sacrifice. She talked about how families pull together, how everyone has a role, how some people are just built to give more than others. Her eyes flickered toward me when she said that last part. My younger sister, Brianna, floated on a cloud of praise, her every minor achievement celebrated as a family victory. I was the one who handled the dishes after the meal and the checks when they came due. My dad just nodded along, his gaze fixed on his plate, always agreeing with the last loud voice he'd heard in the room. I let my mind drift, tallying the cost of my role. Over the years, I'd covered $63,000 of other people's chaos. There were Brianna's maxed-out credit cards, the replacement for her totaled SUV, several months of her rent when she decided she didn't like her job. I'd even paid bail for a boyfriend of hers I'd never even met. Mom always framed it as helping the family, which was code for me helping and everyone else receiving. Brianna had recently gotten engaged to a guy named Caleb Morgan after a whirlwind 4-month romance. She brought it up again over dessert, a casual reminder that I'd probably be helping with the wedding costs. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I just smiled, kept my face calm and my ears open. Data over drama, I told myself. I had started carrying a small notebook everywhere, and later that night I wrote down the date, the implied request, and the exact words they used. The proof folder was getting heavier. The plan was to tell them at Thanksgiving. I thought the holiday, with its themes of gratitude and family, would be the perfect time to share my news and hopefully set a new course for all of us. But a week before the dinner, my mom called. Her voice was cold. She told me that, given my recent attitude and distance, it was probably best if I just stayed away. She said I clearly had nothing to be thankful for and my presence would only bring shame to the family table. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but it was also clarifying. I was being punished for not being as available, as open as I used to be. The withdrawal of my attention was an insult they couldn't tolerate. So I pivoted. Instead of spending Thanksgiving being lectured about my failings, I signed up to volunteer at a local neighborhood kitchen. I spent the day serving turkey and mashed potatoes to people who were genuinely grateful for a warm meal. I asked no one to take my picture, but Tanya Brooks, the kitchen director, insisted on getting a group shot for their social media page. In the photo, I was standing with a carving knife over a golden brown turkey, smiling a real, unforced smile. Later that evening, I posted just that one photo of myself with a single word as the caption: grateful. My phone, which had been peacefully silent all day, immediately erupted. It lit up like a Christmas tree, vibrating against the countertop. 36 missed calls from Mom and Brianna. A long, scrolling string of increasingly frantic text messages. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? What is this picture? You're making a fool of us. I didn't answer a single one. I turned my phone face down on the table and just listened to the quiet of my apartment. The silence felt different now. It wasn't empty, it was powerful, it was mine. That night, the blue proof folder received its first official pages. Screenshots of the call logs, the angry texts, and a printed-out, itemized list of what I'd already given them over the years. I ended the night with my chipped mug, my silence, and a new, harder plan. The confrontation I'd avoided for so long was no longer something to dread. It was inevitable. My quiet had turned into a countdown. The new year rolled in with a bitter Cleveland cold front and a phone call that changed everything. It was January and the holiday madness had faded into a gray, quiet hum. When my phone rang with Mom's number, I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately. I answered on the third ring. Her voice was a conspiratorial whisper laced with a manufactured urgency I knew all too well. She told me she had cancer. She needed money for treatment, she said, and it was urgent. We don't have time to think, Jenna, she breathed into the phone. The number she gave me was precise: $30,000. She offered no details, no doctor's name, no type of cancer, no hospital, no dates. Just the price tag and the pressure. My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot, but my mind went strangely clear. This was a test. Okay, Mom, I said, my voice even. Text me the clinic's information. I'll need to know where to send the money, she dodged. What does that matter? It needs to be in my account. The bills are piling up. The guilt came next, right on schedule. A daughter should do this without questions, Jenna. This is your mother's life we're talking about. I held my ground. I need the clinic's name before I move any money. I told her I was being careful, not cold. She sighed, a long, theatrical sound of disappointment, and said she'd text me the details. Then she hung up. I immediately opened my notebook and wrote down the date, the time, and her exact words. The proof folder was waiting. A few hours later, a text came through with the name of a respected oncology center across town. I waited until the next morning, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. I sat in my parked Toyota in the clinic's visitor lot, the cold of the vinyl seats seeping through my coat. I took a deep breath and dialed the main number. When a calm-voiced receptionist answered, I explained that I was trying to coordinate payments for my mother's upcoming surgery and needed to confirm her appointment details. I gave her my mom's full name and date of birth. The receptionist put me on hold. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft click of my car's hazard lights. When she came back on the line, her voice was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have no record of a patient by that name. There is no diagnosis in our system, no scheduled surgery, nothing." I closed my eyes. I sat there in my car, took 3 slow breaths, and felt a 10-year-old spell shatter into a million pieces. The constant anxiety, the feeling of obligation, the low-grade fear that I was never doing enough, it all just evaporated. It was a lie, a $30,000 lie. I called my mom back. When I asked her again about the clinic and the doctor, her story started to unravel. She got angry, changed the subject, accused me of not trusting her. I told her flatly that I wouldn't be sending a single dollar without proof of a diagnosis. She screamed that I was a cold-hearted snake and slammed the phone down. A few days later, I received an email from the clinic's patient advocate, whom I had spoken to after the initial call. It formally confirmed they had no record of my mother. I printed it out, 3-hole punched it, and placed it reverently into the blue proof folder. My first tactic, calm, simple verification, had worked. But the peace it bought came at a very high price. I finally understood I couldn't trust a single word she said. Only facts could guide me now. The next assault came from my sister. 2 weeks after the cancer lie imploded, Brianna texted me, all sunshine and emojis. "Sister Coffee, my treat, miss you." I knew it was a trap, but I also knew I had to see it through. We met at a trendy little cafe downtown, the air filled with the smell of espresso and baked sugar. She was all smiles and sisterly warmth, asking about work, complimenting my sweater. Then, after the lattes arrived, she launched her attack. She pulled out her phone and started swiping through photos of a beautiful, sprawling house in a wealthy suburb. "Isn't it a dream, Jenna?" she sighed. "Caleb and I are putting in an offer." She laid out her vision. The big yard for their future dog, the perfect kitchen for hosting holidays, the guest room that would be all mine when I visited. Then came the ask. She said it so casually, stirring her latte as if she were asking for a splash of cream. "So, we're going to need about $200,000 for the down payment. Caleb and I figured you could cover that for us. It's a family investment, really." She smiled, a bright, confident smile that expected only one answer. I looked at her, at this golden child who had never once had to face a real consequence, and for the first time in my life I didn't hesitate. "No." The word was short, sharp, and final. Her smile didn't just fade, it cracked. Her face hardened, the warmth vanishing as if it had never been there. "What do you mean, no?" she snapped. "I told you Caleb is counting on this, on you," I repeated myself. "No, Brianna. I'm not giving you $200,000. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears of rage, not sadness. "You are so selfish," she hissed, grabbing her purse. "You've always been selfish." She stormed out of the cafe, leaving her half-finished latte on the table. I sat there for a moment, the adrenaline fading. Saying no felt like stepping off a cliff, but instead of falling, I landed on solid ground. I took out my phone, snapped a picture of the cafe's chalkboard menu to timestamp the day, and later I wrote the date, the amount, and the location in the proof folder. I expected a period of angry silence after my refusal. Instead, the noise got much, much louder. 2 days after the disastrous coffee meeting, my phone buzzed with a group text from my mom. The recipients were me, Brianna, and my dad. The message was blunt: emergency family meeting, my house. "Sunday at 2 p.m. be here." Brianna immediately replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Dad didn't reply at all. I knew exactly what this was. In a follow-up text sent only to me, Mom framed it as an intervention. "We're all very worried about you, Jenna. You've forgotten how to be part of a family, and we need to talk about it." The manipulation was so blatant it was almost laughable. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their access to my bank account. The first thing I did was call Monica. I explained the cancer lie, the $200,000 house demand, and now this mandatory intervention. She listened patiently. "Don't go in there angry, Jenna," she advised. "Anger gives them something to fight against. Go in there with facts. Bring your folder, don't bring fire." After the call, I went to work. I spent the next 2 hours at my kitchen table preparing. I opened a spreadsheet and created a 1-page, line-by-line summary of every single dollar I had ever given them, going all the way back to when I was 21. The grand total at the bottom was $63,427. I printed out 5 copies. I printed the email from the cancer clinic. I added screenshots of my mom's texts demanding the $30,000. I wrote out a simple outline for myself on a fresh page in my notebook. 1. Listen first, say nothing. 2. Respond with facts, not feelings. 3. Stay seated. 4. Keep my voice low and steady. I packed everything neatly into the blue-proof folder. On Sunday morning, I put the folder into my old, worn backpack. It felt less like a collection of papers and more like a suit of armor. My goal was simple. Keep the truth straight when all of their stories were designed to bend. My first act of defense was quiet and digital. The day after the emergency meeting was set, I sent a simple text message to my mom. "I will no longer be discussing money with you. From now on, I will not be sending any funds for family emergencies without verifiable proof of the emergency, like a bill or an official letter." I didn't wait for a reply. I knew it would be a storm of guilt and anger, and I didn't need to read it. My next move was to fortify my finances. I went into my banking app and made it as boring and inaccessible as possible. I canceled any automatic transfers I had set up years ago. I removed any shared access permissions. I turned on alerts for any transaction, no matter how small. I tried to reach my dad, hoping for a sliver of reason. I texted him and asked if he wanted to get coffee, just the two of us. His reply came an hour later. "Your mother handles those things, you should talk to her." He was abdicating, choosing the path of least resistance as always. That night, I started a new routine. I blocked all unknown numbers after 9 p.m. and moved my phone charger to the other side of the room. The physical distance helped create mental distance. For about a week, an unnerving quiet settled over my life. It felt like progress, like I'd finally built a wall they couldn't climb. But I hadn't built a wall, I had just forced them to find another door. The group text started. First, it was a small one with just a few aunts and cousins. Then it expanded. Suddenly, my phone was buzzing with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all of them armed with my mother's version of the story. The social pressure campaign was orchestrated with chilling efficiency. My Aunt Denise, my mom's sister, became the primary mouthpiece. She would write long, sanctimonious paragraphs in the group chat about the importance of honoring your mother and how it was my sacred duty to step up for your sister in her time of need. She painted me as a cold, ungrateful daughter who had forgotten where she came from. Then, someone added Pastor Rob from their church to the chat. Without knowing a single fact about the situation, he chimed in with vague platitudes about forgiveness and the corrosive nature of holding grudges, all of it aimed directly at me. The most insidious tactic came from my mom. She started posting old photos on her social media. One was of a hospital wristband from a minor surgery she'd had 5 years ago. She posted it without a date, implying it was current, a silent testament to her supposed suffering. The comments poured in, "Praying for you, and let us know if you need anything." I took a screenshot of the post and the misleading comments, labeled it with the date, and added it to the proof folder. I refused to engage with them online. Instead, I sent one and only one message to the group chat. "Please stop discussing my private financial choices in a public forum." I will not be funding anything, and this is my final statement on the matter. Half the group went silent after that, probably shocked by the directness. The other half, the true believers, only ramped up the shaming. I muted the thread and continued to document who said what and when. The fight wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. They had lost their direct line to my wallet, and now they were trying to burn down my reputation to force me back into line. Just when I thought the attacks couldn't get more personal, Caleb, Brianna's fiancé, entered the fray. He sent me a text message, the first he had ever sent me directly. "Jenna, we need to talk numbers like adults." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the block button. I decided to see what he had to say. His follow-up texts laid out mortgage terms he clearly didn't understand, using words like amortization and escrow incorrectly. He spoke as if my contribution was a done deal, a mere formality we needed to finalize. The truly revealing part came in one blunt, artless text. "Look, your help makes us look stable. It helps us get a better rate. It helps our image as a couple starting out." It wasn't about family or support, it was a photo shoot. This whole performance of a perfect life was being built on the foundation of my money. I typed back a simple, clear response. "Caleb, you and Brianna need to plan a wedding and a home that you can afford on your own budget. I will not be contributing." His reply was swift and laced with indignant rage. He sent me a bulleted list of what family does, as if quoting from a rulebook I had violated. He ended by implying that this was my duty as Brianna's maid of honor, a role, I might add, that I had never actually been asked to fill. I took a screenshot of the entire conversation, copied it into a document for the proof folder, and then I blocked his number. The very next day, Brianna posted a future home mood board on her Instagram and tagged me in the photo, a public attempt to force my hand. I sent her a direct message asking her to remove the tag. She read it and didn't reply. The tag remained. I was learning that every boundary I built just revealed a new, more desperate way for them to attack. The progress I'd made wasn't peace, it was just a new attack vector, public image and humiliation. The constant stress began to leak into every corner of my life. Sleep became a luxury. I'd wake up almost every night at exactly 3:11 a.m., my mind buzzing, my heart racing. I'd lie in the dark and rehearse conversations I never wanted to have, drafting and redrafting responses to accusations that were probably already flying through some group chat I'd muted. The exhaustion followed me to work. I was a marketing manager, a job that required sharp attention to detail, and I started to slip. I mixed up a file name and sent a draft of a sensitive campaign to the wrong client. I caught the mistake within minutes, apologized profusely, and fixed it before any real damage was done, but the error shook me. I decided to tell my manager, Sally, a woman I respected, a small part of the truth. I simply said I was dealing with some intense family stress and might be a little off my game. I gave no details and she didn't ask for any. She just nodded and said, "Take the space you need. We'll manage." Her kindness was a small island in a raging sea. I clung to my routines. I kept driving my old Toyota even as the check engine light became a permanent fixture on the dashboard. Sticking to these plain, simple choices kept me grounded. After work, I started driving straight to the community kitchen. I wouldn't even go home first. I'd walk in, find Tanya, and she'd hand me a knife and a cutting board. I would stand for an hour chopping onions, the sharp sting in my eyes a welcome distraction. I would breathe in the steam from giant pots of soup instead of the drama from my family. Tanya never asked personal questions. She just gave me a ladle and a to-do list. One night, standing over a sink of soapy water, I took out my little notebook and wrote a new motto at the top of the page: clarity first. Then action. The more I simplified my daily life, the louder and clearer the noise from my family sounded, and the more I knew I had to end it. The evidence I needed to justify my actions started to fall into my lap, hard and undeniable. It was as if their desperation was making them sloppy. My mom, forgetting I might be saving messages, left me a long, tearful voicemail. She was sobbing about having to go in for chemotherapy tomorrow morning and how she was so scared to do it alone. The timestamp on the voicemail was 9:30 p.m. I knew for a fact that the oncology center she'd named closed at 5 p.m. and didn't have an overnight ward. I saved the voicemail to a backup drive and transcribed her exact words along with the timestamp into the proof folder. A few days later, I got another email from the clinic's patient advocate. I had asked her to notify me if my mother ever did try to become a patient. The email was brief. It confirmed again that my mom had no record with them and gently urged that if she was in need of medical help, she should call them directly. They had copied me on it at my request. The lies were piling up. Brianna, not to be outdone, posted a support link on her social media page for Mom's Fight, but the link itself was broken. It didn't go anywhere. It was pure performance. I captured a screenshot of the post, the broken link, and the date. The final piece came from a cousin who was starting to have her own doubts. She forwarded me a draft of a flyer she'd been sent. It was for a benefit dinner to raise money for Mom's medical bills to be held at a local event hall. On a hunch, I called the hall myself. The manager, a friendly man named Mr. Edwards, checked his books. He confirmed they had no reservation under my mother's name or for any benefit dinner on that date. I wrote down his name and the exact time of our call. I printed everything, the voicemail transcription, the clinic's second email, the screenshot of the fake fundraiser, my notes from the call with the hall manager. I hole-punched each sheet and filed it away in the blue proof folder, which was now thick with indexed sticky tabs. The first reveal was coming into focus, and it was devastatingly simple. The entire cancer story was a complete and utter lie wrapped in layers of fake urgency and public performance. With the folder full of undeniable proof, I knew I had to take a bigger step. I had to sever a primary line of communication. Sitting in my quiet apartment, I pulled up my mom's contact information on my phone. My thumb hovered over the block this caller button. I thought about all the years of late-night calls, the tearful demands, the endless cycle of crisis and rescue. With a deep breath, I pressed the button. For the first time in my adult life, my mother could not reach me. The silence that followed was immediate and profound. That weekend, I skipped Sunday dinner. I sent my dad a short, simple text. "I'm not coming to dinner today. I hope you're okay." His reply came back almost instantly. "Talk to your mother, nothing else." He wasn't going to help. He was just going to point me back toward the source of the problem. I felt a pang of sadness for him, for the man he could have been if he hadn't chosen to be a bystander in his own life. On my way home from the grocery store, I drove by their house. I pulled into the driveway, walked up to the porch, and left a bag of groceries, bread, milk, eggs, the basics. Then I got back in my car and drove away before anyone saw me. It was a strange, final act of care without contact. Later that evening, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. I let it ring out. Brianna was already trying to find a way around the wall I'd built. I told myself that burned bridges aren't dramatic if they're quiet and necessary for survival. I felt a wave of grief for the family I wished I had, but beneath it, I felt my lungs fill with air more deeply than they had in months. I marked the calendar on my kitchen wall. The intervention was 1 week away. My new approach was all about building systems, not just having reactions. I met with Monica again, and she drafted simple, straightforward letters to be sent to my mom, Brianna, and my Aunt Denise. The letters didn't threaten or accuse, they just stated a fact. I would not be discussing financial matters with them, and they were to stop contacting me about money. It was a formal line in the sand. On my own, I took more practical steps. I went to a small credit union across town, a place where no one in my family banked, and opened a new account under my first and middle name. This account would be for the future, for the donations I was already planning to make. It was a secret garden where my money could do good without anyone knowing. I also rented a small post office box. From now on, all my official mail, bank statements, bills, everything would go there. My home address was slowly disappearing from the public record. For communication, I bought a cheap, prepaid phone and put a fresh number on it. This would be my emergency line, the one I used for any new or unknown calls. I kept it turned off unless I absolutely needed it. The last and maybe most important step was to create a small, trusted circle. I told 2 people the basic facts: Dev Shah, a friend from work who knew how to keep his mouth shut, and Tanya from the kitchen. I didn't give them numbers or dramatic details. I just said, my family is pushing me very hard about money and I've had to create some boundaries. I'm not discussing it, but I wanted you to know things are tense. They both just nodded and offered their support without prying. I wrote a calm script on an index card that I kept in my wallet. Breathe, listen, answer the question once. Do not explain, do not defend. My new strategy was simple: fewer reactions, more records. The world started to feel like it was closing in, a series of ticking clocks counting down to a confrontation. Brianna, oblivious to the storm she was helping to create, posted a countdown on her social media. 14 days until offer day, with a picture of the house she couldn't afford. That was the first clock. The emergency meeting, my family's planned ambush, sat on my calendar just 4 days away, a big red circle that felt more like a target. That was the second clock. My own life had a deadline too. My apartment lease was up in 3 months. I circled the date in red ink. It was a potential escape hatch, a chance to move and create real physical distance. That was the third clock, and then there was a fourth, a positive one. Tanya had mentioned the big spring fundraiser for the community kitchen, a major event that was 8 weeks away. I marked that on my calendar too. It was a point of light on the horizon, a reminder that there was a world outside of my family's drama. House, meeting, lease, fundraiser, 4 clocks all ticking at different speeds. The pressure was immense, but it was also focusing. I created a new file in my backpack, a slim manila folder labeled simply, Intervention. Inside, I put my bullet points, the order in which I would present the facts, and a list of questions I would and would not answer. I promised myself I would walk into that living room with the blue-proof folder and nothing else. I wouldn't bring anger or tears or pleas for understanding. I would bring the truth. The forced pivot was decided. I would go to their meeting and I would confront their lies head-on. But the bigger truth, the one about the money, I would keep that for the exact right moment. The air in my parents' living room was thick and still, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I walked in with my backpack over one shoulder, took the blue-proof folder out, placed it squarely on the coffee table, and sat in the armchair opposite the sofa. They were arranged like a tribunal. On the couch sat my mom, a box of tissues already in her lap, and Brianna holding a notebook and pen as if she were about to take minutes. My dad stood by the window, his arms crossed, a silent statue. Caleb sat in a chair near the doorway, a self-appointed gatekeeper. Mom opened the proceedings. "Jenna," she began, her voice trembling with practiced concern, "we're all so worried about you." She launched into a list of my supposed transgressions, the changes she'd noticed in me. My need for privacy, my new boundaries, my infuriating silence. Brianna picked up the thread seamlessly. She said I was abandoning family goals and single-handedly ruining her timeline for the house and the wedding. Caleb chimed in, leaning forward with a condescending air. "We can settle this like adults, Jenna," he said, as if he were a mediator in a business negotiation instead of a freeloader in a family dispute. I did exactly what I had planned. I asked them to speak one at a time. I took out my own pen and my small notebook and I let them talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I just made notes, jotting down times and their specific claims. When the torrent of accusations and grievances finally subsided, a heavy silence filled the room. They were all looking at me, expecting tears, an apology, a surrender. Instead, I calmly reached forward and opened the blue-proof folder. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer. Then I looked at each of them, making eye contact with my mom, then Brianna, then my dad, and finally Caleb. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice low and steady. "Last March, I won the lottery. I paused to let the words land. The room froze. 4 faces stared back at me, a mixture of disbelief and confusion. Then chaos erupted. Everyone started talking at once. What? How much? Why didn't you tell us? I held up one hand, a simple gesture to stop, and they fell silent, hungry for the number. It was approximately $8. $7 million after taxes, I said plainly. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Before they could explode again, I continued, my voice cutting through their shock. I stayed quiet on purpose. I wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I had nothing. I wanted to see who you really are. I looked directly at my mom, then at Brianna. And now I know. I let that sink in, watching the greed and calculation flicker in their eyes. Then I delivered the line I had been rehearsing for months. I owe you nothing. My mom instinctively reached for my hand, a gesture of connection she hadn't made in years. I pulled my hand back and placed it flat on my lap. I will not, I said, my voice as hard and clear as glass, be funding a fake medical story, a down payment on a house, or a wedding you can't afford. The plan had flipped entirely. There was no more hiding the truth. From this moment on, my only job was to enforce it. I opened the blue-proof folder and slid the first sheet across the coffee table like a card on a poker table. The paper was a simple ledger: dates, amounts, reasons, neat, boring numbers that did the work emotion never could. At the bottom, in slightly heavier ink, was the total, $63,427. I watched my mom's face change the way a picture does when you turn up the brightness. She reached out before I finished. I stopped her hand with my eyes and kept talking. I started this when I was 21, I said. There are credit card payments, car repairs, rent, even bail money for people I didn't know. I have copies of texts where you ask me for specific amounts. I have receipts for transfers and notes about why the money was sent. I picked up the clinic email, the one that said plainly and politely that there was no record of her. I handed it to my dad. He read it slowly, his mouth forming the same small O I'd seen on TV when someone finally reads bad news out loud. Then I played the voicemail, the trembling voice claiming chemotherapy the night the clinic wasn't open. The room felt like it was underwater. Every sound was muffled except for that voice and the click of the folder snapping closed. Brianna's hands flew to her face. The sobs came out hot and jagged, practice grief she'd apparently had stored up for years. Caleb leaned forward, jaw tight, like he was trying to pull meaning from a thin soup. I slid the cafe chalkboard photo across the table next. Sister Coffee, I said softly, where you asked for $200,000. I showed them the timestamp photo on my phone, the message threads, the moment she left in a hiss of anger. I let each thing sit where they could be looked at. The fake fundraiser flyer and the hall manager's note saying there was no booking, the broken support link on Brianna's social post. The screenshot of Mom's old hospital wristband posted like evidence. Every scrap was labeled, dated, and indexed. This was not a tantrum, this was a file. I spoke the pattern out loud so there was no room for their fog. You speak loudly about sacrifice when you want things. You perform pain to wring money out of people. When you want to look good in public, you draft fundraisers and broken links. When you want to get what you want privately, you push guilt. You love me when I pay, you ignore me when I don't. My voice was flat, the way someone reads a grocery list. I won't be your cashier. There were moments when each face shifted. Mom's practiced worry slid into anger, Brianna's cries turned to wrath, Dad looked down at the carpet like someone watching a car pass over a puddle. Caleb's expression moved from defensive to furious. None of them had prepared for a ledger. I owe you nothing, I said, and my words landed like a door slamming. Mom lunged to touch my knee. I pulled my hand back and kept it in my lap. She started to cry again, louder this time, but the sound had no origin. Brianna screamed that I was breaking her life as if the world were a simple machine that would stop without a coin. Caleb called me selfish and stormed for the door. Dad folded his hands, and for once he didn't offer a comforting platitude. He just looked tired, like a man who had always chosen silence and suddenly found it had an echo he couldn't like. I'm done, I said. I pushed the folder into my backpack and stood. My legs felt steady. There will be no money from me to any of you. I'm building a life where love can't be bought. The sentence felt big in my mouth. I watched how it rearranged the room. The fallout was immediate and bright. Mom shouted that I was ungrateful, that I was cruel for cutting them off when they needed me. Her voice cracked and then held like a violin string. Brianna promised revenge in the plain way of someone used to getting what she wanted without effort. Caleb slammed the door so hard the frame trembled. I heard his footsteps fade down their front steps. Dad put his paper down and didn't follow him. He folded into the window's light, a silhouette. I could have stayed to argue. I could have sat and tried to explain how it felt to be used. Instead, I zipped my backpack, said, "Take care of yourselves," and walked out the door. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and the faint perfume my mom preferred for holidays. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a cold, clear certainty like frost on a windshield. I knew the cost would be high. I also knew the cost of staying was higher. I closed the car door, and for the first time in a long time, I did not look back. That night, at 11:47, someone banged on my apartment door hard enough to rattle the drywall. My chest tightened so sharply I thought I might pass out. Through the peephole I could see Mom and Brianna, their faces blown up and red in the cheap hallway light. Brianna's voice smashed through the wood, high and keening, "Open up. You can't do this to us, you owe us." Mom was behind her, leaning forward, lips moving with something like a prayer. I didn't open the door. My hands were steady, but they shook as I fumbled for the phone. I called the non-emergency line. Holding the phone under my chin, I explained the situation in a voice that tried to be as routine as possible. An officer came by, slow-footed, polite. When he left, Mom and Brianna were still on the stoop, but they didn't pound anymore. I saved the call from my building's intercom and photoed the dirty scuff mark left on my doorframe where someone had shoved their shoulder. The next morning, my voicemail box was full. There were messages I could have played on loop and made a movie out of: pleading, masked apologies, threats, the kind of weeping that sounded practiced. I saved each one, every infuriated breath, every manipulative sob, and uploaded them to an encrypted drive Monica had told me to use. By morning, the harassment extended beyond my hallway. Brianna posted a long, dramatic status about a selfish daughter who had abandoned her sick mother. Comments poured in like an open faucet: righteous anger, friends picking sides, strangers offering prayers. Caleb liked and shared the post with a caption of his own about family values. The post made its way through my community, then my work, then people who had once been neighbors. My phone buzzed with notifications I didn't want. Tags, shares, messages. I didn't answer any of them. I let the noises pile up and saved screenshots. I bought a small door camera that morning and set it to record motion. The camera collected a few minutes of people walking away, one frame of Mom wiping her face with a sleeve, Brianna's eyes hard and animal. I watched those seconds on a cold loop and felt the strange comfort of evidence. The next week, someone told Mr. Alvarez in the mailroom that they'd seen two women asking which unit I lived in. He'd shrugged and lied, told them he didn't know. The building felt watched. I realized that my apartment was no longer a refuge. It was a place people came to if they wanted something from me. That truth hurt more than their anger. It was one thing to lose affection. It was another to have a space I'd claimed for myself become a waypoint for manipulators. I called Monica. She was practical and quiet, the way a surgeon is before a procedure. "Make a plan," she said. "Find a place with better security. Don't tell anyone where you're moving. Change your address at the post office." It was obvious but necessary. I started looking that night. I found a small apartment across town, 3 blocks from a bus line and 2 neighborhoods removed from the Moms and Sister circuit. It had a gated lot, better lighting, and an actual buzzer system. The landlord did a quick background check. I paid a deposit through the new account I'd opened and arranged a move date 3 months out, timed to the end of my lease at the old place. I wanted time to breathe, time to plan, time to make the move quiet and unremarkable. The thought of picking up my life and relocating felt both freeing and impossibly sad. Leaving my first apartment was harder than I expected. That tiny space with its squeaky floors and chipped tile was the place I'd learned to be alone and not lonely. I'd cooked my first Thanksgiving there, actually cooked, not heating a plastic tray, and I'd cried into my chipped mug more nights than I could count. Packing felt like stripping down the scaffolding of my life. I boxed up the chipped mug, the plant that had survived an entire winter on my windowsill, and a stack of unpaid bills I'd paid on time for years. I left a note in the kitchen closet for the next renter. The squeaky floorboard next to the fridge could be fixed with a nail. It was small and absurd, a human thing to pass along. Meanwhile, the fallout followed me beyond the walls of my building. Someone in my office heard the whispers and repeated them softly in the kitchen. A coworker, careful and awkward, leaned over my cubicle and said, "There's talk on the internet. People are saying things." I kept my face neutral and said, "It's family drama, I'm handling it." My inbox was suddenly a little colder, my calendar a little heavier, but I kept doing the work I'd always done. I turned in projects on time. I kept meetings brief and professional. I'd never been good at drama at the office. I was good at tidy deliverables and deadlines. The safe harbor I'd always had in my job felt like it was thinning, but I clung to the parts I could control. One afternoon, driving home from the community kitchen with a box of donated bread in the back seat, I spotted my dad sitting in his truck across the street from my building. He was idling, hands on the wheel, the engine making a small, steady sound. He looked right at me, our eyes met through the windshield, and he didn't wave. He didn't get out. He just sat there, a man watching the place where his daughter lived, as if the driveway were a stage and he'd been relegated to audience member. He texted me later, "I'm here if you want to talk," but only when Mom's car was parked down the block, which was the only time I ever saw him leave the truck. I replied, "We can talk when it's just you and me," and he didn't answer back. It was the kind of silence that said more than any argument. The volunteers at the kitchen started to hear bits and pieces. "There's a post going around," Marcus said one night, slinging a crate into the back of his truck. He didn't press, didn't ask for details. Tanya asked if I needed extra support for the fundraiser. I said no, I'd be there, and meant it. The community around me, the one I'd chosen, stayed steady. That steadiness reminded me that most people don't keep score the way my family did. They just brought casseroles, picked up shifts, and said thank you. Those little gestures kept me going more than any public rebuttal ever could. I changed my main number the day after the fundraiser, and I gave it only to 3 people, Dev, Tanya, and Monica. I kept the old phone on a shelf in my kitchen on low power so I could still see if anything desperate came through, but I didn't answer it. The separation felt like a small ceremony, putting one life down and picking up another. Monica told me to carry every important paper with me, so I kept a copy of the court paper in my backpack. The paper was plain and direct. It said Mom had to stay away from my home and not contact me. I didn't like the words on the page, but I liked the way they protected a quiet room where I could make coffee without listening for footsteps. I printed an extra copy of the paper and handed it to the building manager. He folded it into his file and said, "If anyone asks where she lives, we tell them we don't know." His voice was small and practical. I liked that. I started timing my comings and goings to patterns that made it harder to guess where I'd be. I varied which doors I used, which bus stops I stood at. Silly things like walking a different route to the dumpster became acts of self-care. I bought a baseball cap and wore it when I felt watched. It hid me in plain sight. Monica and I made a basic security plan for the spring fundraiser. It was not dramatic. 2 volunteers would stand at the front door and politely check a simple list. Marcus would call the non-emergency line if anyone caused a scene. Tanya taught everyone a calm code phrase we could use if things felt heated. The phrase was ordinary. "Can you grab the green apron?" It sounded like a request for server help, and that's the point. It let us move without shouting. I wrote the steps on an index card and tucked it into my wallet. The tighter my circle got, the calmer I felt. Small practical rules replaced the old rules that had cost me so much. Then Caleb called me from a number I didn't recognize. He was quieter than before, his words slowed. "Jenna," he said, "I need to ask you something directly. Is it true? Are we getting the down payment?" I could hear paper shuffling in the background, Brianna maybe, or his own nervousness. The question was simple and stupid, and it deserved a simple and stupid answer. "No," I said, "there never was a down payment from me." His voice went small and then loud. "What do you mean we talked about this?" "You promised," I stopped him. "I never promised you $200,000, I said, my tone steady. "You and Brianna need to make plans you can afford. I won't be a secret bank." He stumbled through a few more sentences and then told me he had proposed based on plans everyone agreed on. I told him again that I had not agreed. I told him the truth. I had kept my win secret on purpose to see who I was to my family when my wallet was closed. I heard silent footsteps on his end, then the sound of him hanging up and dialing Brianna. 2 days later, his social media changed silently. No engagement photos, no glow, no caption. Brianna's posts shifted into vague heartbreak quotes and selfies at the gym. I watched the timeline roll out like a slow curtain falling. I felt something complicated: sadness for Brianna's mistake, relief that a marriage wasn't being built on a promise that never existed, and a thin strand of sorrow for Caleb, who had wanted a tidy life and had been handed one made of borrowed glow. I saved the threads of the conversation. I screenshot his text and the messages he sent afterward, the ones where he seemed to be trying to piece together why a promise had dissolved. I didn't celebrate. I don't take pleasure in someone else's scramble, but I did feel the weight of a truth landing. My boundary had exposed a fantasy they were sharing. The fantasy cracked, and they were left to sweep up the pieces on their own. After that, the separate threads started to come together in a way that made everything clearer and crueler. My cousin texted me something she shouldn't have had to see, a portion of a conversation where Brianna described my supposed promise, saying she'd mentioned it in front of Dad as if that made it real. Dad had told a neighbor I was going through a phase and that I'd come around if given time. That line was the worst kind of enabling, looking away and believing the quiet was the same as consent. Mom, meanwhile, kept posting old photos of a younger woman in a hospital bed, captions about still fighting and days are hard with no dates, no context. She blurred the real and the invented until the difference didn't matter to everyone else. Someone from a mutual friend group sent me a private message. "Something feels off. I don't know the whole story, but I've seen a lot of performative stuff." I replied, "You're right." Saying that felt like dumping a bucket of clear water on a messy table. The machine was visible now. Mom invented the storyline, Brianna amplified it to get what she wanted, and Dad, who had the chance to stop the engine, chose to sit in the passenger seat and look out the window. I wrote the pattern in my notebook in block letters that didn't feel dramatic: give where love isn't demanded. It was a principle, simple and cold. If someone claimed sickness to get money, if someone treated you like a banker instead of family, they were asking for a transaction, not care. My version of care wouldn't be a check. It would be action that didn't ask for gratitude or obligation. I drew a line under it and felt the shape of my future settle a little more firmly around me. Then my last clean option went away, pushed by a stranger who thought they were fighting for justice. Someone emailed the human resources department at my company with a messy, half-true story about me being unstable with money and how that might affect my performance. The email was vague, breathless, and dramatic in the way people are when they want to be believed. Human resources called me into a private room. The woman across from me was kind but direct. "We need to know if this is affecting your work," she said. I told her the truth in simple terms. "It's family drama. People are saying things online and that's made my days harder. I'm handling it. I'm not discussing my private finances here." She nodded and said she appreciated my clarity. The phone had become a leash. My steady paycheck used to be a quiet refuge, a place where I could bury myself in work and let other parts fall away. But once someone dragged my private life into the public, the job felt less like shelter and more like a stage where old stories were replayed. I realized that if I stayed, the rumor mill would keep grinding. My calm, predictable life at the office might keep me safe in some ways, but it would also let them keep pulling on threads I wanted cut. So I made a choice. I wrote a letter, short, polite, and tidy, saying I was resigning and giving 2 weeks' notice. I didn't need to explain or convince anyone. I slid the letter across my manager's desk. Sally looked at me with eyes that had seen me through tight deadlines and coffee-fueled nights. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Do what's right for you," she said. It was the same small, steady care she'd always given. I finished my last campaign, filed the final reports, and left my desk empty. I boxed up my chipped mug, wrapped it in a clean dish towel, and placed my blue-proof folder on top so it wouldn't get lost in the hollow of the box. Walking out of the office that last day felt strangely like closing a door and locking it from the inside. My chest was tight, but my step was not hesitant. Dev hugged me on the sidewalk, and for the first time in months, I let someone hold both the sadness and the relief with me. I had enough saved to step away, and the choice felt like buying myself time to breathe and act without other people's hands on my throat. Leaving the steady hum of work was both terrifying and freeing. I had trained myself to perform competence in fluorescent light, and now I had to perform a life on purpose. I didn't know exactly where the money would lead or what the right next move would be, but I knew what I would not do. I would not let the people who had spent me think I was still theirs to spend. I walked away with my backpack, my resignation letter tucked in the side pocket, the blue-proof folder snug and heavy, and my chipped mug wrapped like a talisman. The last safe option had been removed, but it was removed because I chose to step into something fiercer, a plan for a life where my value wouldn't be measured by how much I gave. I built the plan in small, stubborn steps. I sat with Monica and told her what I wanted, not revenge that burned bridges for the sake of spectacle, but a life that made their expectations meaningless. We talked about ways to use the money that wouldn't draw attention but would do obvious good. Monica handled the paperwork I didn't want to think about and kept her questions practical. Who, how much, what would it change? I told her to set up funds in a way that let me remain anonymous if I wanted. Then I started moving. 12 times $10,000 went to local scholarships for first-generation college students. I didn't want my face on a plaque. I wanted a young person to get a chance without the humiliation of asking. Monica and I worked with a small nonprofit I trusted. They agreed to keep the donors private. I wired $91,000 to clear medical debt for 3 families. A volunteer at the kitchen had quietly told me about one family under Gonzales, one under HSU, and a woman named Miss Peterson who'd been drowning in bills for years. I covered a deposit, $1,800, for Raina and her son Jaden so they could move into a safer apartment near the bus line. I paid for a new fridge and safer knives for the kitchen, bought decent shoes for long-shift volunteers, and set aside money for long-term needs Tanya said would matter. The point wasn't drama, it was alignment. I wrote the line in my notebook and underlined it twice: deny entitlement, fund dignity. That line kept me honest on days when the calls and posts made me want to explode or holler back. It kept me from sending money to the people who had trained themselves to ask for it and instead sent it to people who needed it without assuming they'd get it because of our family name. I also wrote my will with Monica. The sentence there was sharp and final because I wanted it to be. I left my fortune, what remained after careful plans, and the funds I'd already set to charities, to the kitchen, and to programs that helped people get stable on their own. I made a specific choice to exclude my biological family. It felt cold to write, and maybe it was, but it also felt like closing a door so it couldn't be reopened by anyone who thought love was a tab they could run up. Monica slid the papers across the desk quietly, like passing a book. I signed, I initialed, I kept a copy in my backpack, the blue-proof folder beneath it like a quiet witness. For a while, the plan felt like a fragile stone balanced on a hill. If word ever got out and they connected dots, there would be chaos. I knew that. I also knew I couldn't live where my value was measured by how much I would add to someone else's life. So I moved forward, carefully, quietly, and with fierce attention to the small things. confirmations, receipts, the soft sound of my chipped mug in the sink at night. The first night after I finalized some of the donations, I came home to find my doormat moved and a shallow scrape at the edge of the lock. The kind of small vandalism people do when they're trying to make you nervous without leaving fingerprints. My hands went cold. I checked the door once, twice, then each closet in the apartment, the bathroom, the narrow space under the bed. Nothing else was disturbed. The light in the hallway looked normal, like it always did. The scrape was the only sign. My chest tightened the way it does when someone says a word you don't want to hear. I sat on the couch and stared at the scrape for a long time. I called Monica and left a short message. She answered within minutes like she always did. "Stay with a friend tonight," she said. "Lock every door. Call the non-emergency line and tell them you found this." Her voice was not dramatic, it was practical, and it made me breathe again. I slept with the light on and both phones on the nightstand. I kept my clothes in a small pile at the foot of the bed in case I needed to move. I dreamed of the little house I grew up in, the one where Mom would only call when she needed something and Dad would say, "Go see what Jenna can do." I woke up with my heart pounding, throat tight, and a headache like a small, persistent drum. I wrote "not safe" in my notebook and circled it 3 times until the ink bled a little. Shame followed that fear, shame that my boundaries had made me a target at all, shame that I felt small when I had millions in the bank. The panic made me think of giving in. For one awful, bright moment, I pictured writing a check, letting them go away, buying silence with a number. I hated that image so much I wanted to scrub it from my brain. Instead, I called Monica. Instead of telling me to pay, she reminded me of the basic, ordinary steps that actually kept people safe. Change locks if you have to, get a door camera, keep receipts for everything, and do not engage in public fights. She told me to take photographs of the damage, to save voicemail messages and texts, and to forward copies to her. Practical things that didn't make for a movie but kept me from spiraling. The core wound under everything didn't come from a single scrape or a shouted accusation. It settled back into the shape it had always been, the belief that I was only worth something when I was useful. I sat at the kitchen table one night and wrote it down the way you name a pain so it becomes manageable. I wrote the oldest lies in bullet points. I'm only valuable if I'm useful. If I disappear, no one will miss me unless they need money. If I stop doing everything for everyone, I will be alone. Memories came in a steady, sorrowful stream. I remembered washing dishes while Brianna watched cartoons and Mom praised her for being sweet and quiet. I remembered Dad saying, "Can you cover gas?" the morning of my 16th birthday when the family was supposed to take me out. I remembered handing my card to Mom the day I graduated, just for emergencies, and watching it turn into other people's dinners and repairs and bail bonds. The wound wasn't dollars, it was the pattern of being seen only through what I could hand over. I put my hand on the blue-proof folder like a child who presses a hand to the banister on a staircase. The papers were evidence, but they were also a rope to grip. Saying out loud, "I exist even when I say no," sounded ridiculous at first, then like something I needed to practice. The words steadied me. I said them into the mirror while brushing my teeth until the syllables stopped sounding like a plea and started to sound like a boundary I meant to keep. Isolation grew in slow, careful ways. I blocked 3 more numbers when they began sending the same scripts, Aunt Denise forwarding guilt, 2 unknowns pressing for a meeting. I deleted a family photo album from my phone and moved a copy to an external drive that I locked in a drawer. My contacts list became tidy and small, mostly names of people who had been steady without expectation. My call log looked like a desert, blank and quiet, which should have felt miraculous but instead felt like a room with the lights out. I ate cereal for dinner more nights than I'd like to admit. Silence had a new weight to it, an emptiness that felt like a physical thing in my chest. Dev texted, "Checking in, want ramen?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't trying to be cold. Sometimes I was so tired the idea of making conversation felt impossible. Tanya texted later, "We appreciate you. See you Thursday." I typed yes and hit send, fingers cramped a little. The small acts of acceptance felt like stitches being sewn into a frayed hem. Sometimes I would stand in the kitchen at 2 in the morning and watch the steam rise from my chipped mug until the pattern of the forget-me-nots blurred. I tried not to romanticize the quiet. I let it be what it was, a landscape I was building, not one that was given to me. The loneliness was real, but so was the relief. The silence was not an absence of life. It was the absence of the old arrangement where I always paid the bill for everyone else's story. Among all that quiet, one fragile possibility kept returning like a light. The community kitchen became a place that didn't ask me who I was because of money. Tanya, Ruthie, Marcus, people with their own small dramas and steady hands, liked me because I showed up and chopped onions, not because I opened my wallet. Ruthie was the first to notice when I started to change. She slid a biscuit into my palm on a Tuesday and said, "Eat first, then we talk." Marcus told a joke about the bread deliveries and didn't demand an explanation for why I looked tired. Lexi, a bright young woman in line for a scholarship, told me with a grin that she was the first in her family to go to college. Her excitement didn't hinge on my presence. It hinged on the letter she'd gotten and the promise of a class schedule. I found myself breathing a little more easily in the kitchen's heat. I promised Tanya I'd help with the spring fundraiser on check-in and cleanup. It was a small promise, but it felt like making a new kind of contract, a promise to people who didn't expect anything in return. I whispered to myself over the sink, "I will not go back," and the words felt less like a threat and more like a vow. The fundraiser became the thing that pulled the timeline together. I arrived early the day of the event with the blue-proof folder snug in my backpack, though I hoped I wouldn't need it. The kitchen smelled like lemon and hot oil, and volunteers moved with the kind of quiet focus that comes from doing the same good work over and over. Marcus greeted me with a broad smile and a clipboard. We went over the guest list together, names of donors, volunteers, and a few community partners. He tapped the list like a metronome. "If anyone gets loud, we ask them to step outside," he said, the way people who are used to handling crowds speak. "If they don't leave, we call the non-emergency line." Tanya and I rehearsed the calm code phrase one last time. It was ordinary on purpose. "Can you grab the green apron?" So that if someone used it, no one in the crowd would panic. 2 volunteers would stand by the entrance, one to check names and one to watch for trouble. A volunteer had the non-emergency number saved in the front of her phone with one quick tap ready. My phone was on silent and face down on the check-in table. The donation jar sat near the stage, plain glass with a taped sign, "For hungry neighbors." The new fridge hummed in the kitchen like an engine finally tuned right. I tied my hair back, pinned my name tag, Jenna, and smoothed the front of my sweater. My hands felt steady for the first time in weeks. I reviewed the lines in my head in the same low voice I'd practiced for months. "This is not about you. If someone disrupts, call for help. Keep the space safe." I folded my calm script index card and slipped it into my back pocket. The room started to fill with pies, casseroles, and people who had their own quiet reasons for coming. The hum of conversation rose like a tide. The fundraiser was a small, ordinary kind of revolution, a night where food and dignity were the point and being there mattered more than any speech. They came in near sunset like they owned the room. Mom walked with that slow, practiced sorrow she always used when the camera needed pity. Brianna followed, her smile brittle and rehearsed. They stopped at the door and Mom lifted her face to the crowd like she'd been handed the microphone by fate. "We're here to speak," she announced, loud enough that half the room turned to look. I stepped forward before she could reach for the stage. I put my hand lightly on the edge of the table, the blue-proof folder heavy in my backpack under the table. My voice was the same quiet I'd used at the intervention, steady, even the product of months of practice. "No," I said, "this is a fundraiser. If you'd like to volunteer, be welcome. If you want to make this personal, you need to leave." A hush fell. Brianna tried to smile and said the town needed both sides, like this was a debate on the news. People shifted uneasily in their seats. A friend in the crowd, Mrs. Hargrove, who'd held a casserole dish in one hand and a hymnal in the other, put down her plate and watched me. Marcus, who ran the deliveries, took a step behind me and whispered, "We've got your back." Tanya moved to my left, her face calm and her fingers already poised to hand me a napkin because that's what she does, fix small things, make them right. Mom tried guilt next, the oldest trick. "I'm your mother," she said, and the room softened for a beat. I didn't flinch. "And you're breaking a court order," I answered, because that was true, and true was a weapon that made nonsense stop. Mom froze. For a second, the lines in her face looked smaller, like someone had turned down the lights on the theater of her performance. A volunteer at the door pointed to the posted rules about disruptions, someone else whispered into a phone. The calm code phrase slid out from Tanya's mouth like an anchor. "Can you grab the green apron?" Two volunteers stepped forward and asked them politely to step outside. Brianna hiccuped a protest about fairness about both sides, but the crowd had already decided. People had come to feed neighbors, not to witness a family fight. Mom's voice tried to climb higher to reach old sympathies, but one of the volunteers, gently as he could manage, said, "If you cause trouble, we'll have to ask you to leave." Mom's jaw set. Brianna's eyes flashed. They left under the directional push of other people's good intentions, not my anger. They left when the room turned back to the food. I didn't shout, I didn't need to. Standing there with flour on my hands and my name tag warm against my chest, I felt steadier than I had in months. My choice had been simple: don't feed the machine that had been built to feed off me. The room hummed back into service. People folding napkins, kids running with volunteer badges, someone rolling out a cart of pies. I breathed in the smell of lemon oil and hot bread and let the small, ordinary work pull me back into a life that had nothing to do with being an ATM. When the moment came to speak to the whole room, I didn't make a scene. I stepped up to the mic because Tanya lifted the edge of the podium with a look that said, "Your voice now." I faced the crowd, the faces a collage of neighbors and old volunteers and a few new donors who smelled like winter coats and hopeful plans. "Thank you for being here," I said. "This night is about people getting food, and that's what we're here to do." My voice didn't shake. "We are not doing personal stories, we're here to serve our neighbors with dignity." I let that sink in for a heartbeat, then nodded to Tanya, who had already agreed to read a short statement. She read it softly. "Tonight, a quiet friend funded a new refrigerator for our kitchen, paid medical debt for 3 local families, and underwrote 12 scholarships for first-generation college students." The room exhaled. The words landed like loaves on a table. A ripple of applause moved through the crowd, soft clapping, eyes shining not for my name but for what the money would do. Brianna's face in the back doorway crumpled as if someone had pinched a seam and let the stuffing come out. Mom's cheeks burned a slow, shameful red. They stayed near the exit until the applause faded and then backed out under the weight of other people's joy. No shouting fit, no social media amphitheater, just the quiet power of other people claiming what should have always belonged to them. I didn't follow them. I handed out plates and napkins, filled a box with sandwiches to send to a family that had just lost a job, and thanked the volunteers for showing up. The decisive outcome wasn't a takedown or a speech that left them broken. It was a refusal. Their story didn't get center stage. The room turned back to the reason we were there, and in doing that, it took the oxygen out of their performance. After the fundraiser, I took my phone out and turned it face down on the check-in table the same way I always did now, intentionally. Silence had become a practice. I slipped the blue-proof folder back into my backpack untouched. I didn't need to wave it in anyone's face for the truth to matter. The new fridge hummed in the kitchen like a small machine that would keep food cold and families fed. The 12 scholarships would send letters to young people whose hands were shaking while they opened envelopes, not because someone felt entitled, but because someone believed in them. That night, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with my chipped mug and watched steam curl from black tea. The old Toyota keys rested on the counter. Tomorrow, I planned to hand that car over to Marcus for deliveries. The motifs I'd carried all year clicked into place like a well-made puzzle. The blue folder had been used as armor when I needed to prove a lie. Now it could be closed and filed. The chipped mug, the small, stubborn object that had anchored me in ordinary mornings, sat steady. The phone, which had once vibrated like a throat clearing for more bills, lay dark and obedient, answering only to the people I had chosen. Silence returned to me, but this time it was on my terms. I chose when to power it up and when to let it rest. It was no longer a thing that someone else could weaponize to make me feel small. It was mine, a blank page where I could write a calendar of steady, quiet acts: volunteering, checking scholarship applications, meeting Raina for a handoff of a child's car seat, dropping off a box of bread at the community fridge. The money moved where dignity lived and not where entitlement demanded. The days that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm. My new apartment smelled like wood soap and orange peels because I liked the smell of both and because cleaning felt like safety. I slept without my shoes by the bed and without the habit of glancing at the phone every few minutes. Twice a week I volunteered at the kitchen. On other mornings I walked by the lake with a cheap thermos of coffee and no one to impress. The scholarship letters came back slow at first, thank yous written in hand by kids who still used lined paper like a ritual. I read them without replying, smiling into the quiet of my living room like someone hearing good music. The medical debt updates arrived occasionally with the simple stamp, paid. A balance for a Gonzalez family dropped to zero. Sue's number disappeared from the hospital notice. Miss Peterson wrote a short, flinty email that said she could breathe. I filed those emails in a folder labeled good and whispered good each time. I kept my spending: lean, books, decent shoes for the kitchen, a couple of good knives I'd bought because I liked the feel of a well-made blade in my hand when I chopped. I met Raina once to hand over a better car seat. Her son, Jaden, stared up at me with a kind of bold curiosity that made my chest ache in the best way. He waved like I'd invented the moon. Money moved quietly where love actually lived. I bought groceries and left them in the community fridge. I paid for a bus pass for a woman who worked nights so she could get home from the hospital in daylight. None of it was about spectacle or proof. It was about making the small, steady choices that change one life at a time. There were visible costs, of course. Holidays that used to reel with argument now had empty chairs where old fights had sat. The first Thanksgiving without them felt like a wound dressed in neat bandages. Dad left one last voicemail that made my stomach twist. "I miss you, your mother is having a hard time." He didn't mention the court paper. He didn't ask what had been said or if the accusations were true. He asked in a voice that sounded like someone practicing regret but not ready to do the work of it. I listened to the message twice and then didn't call back. I wrote in my notebook one sentence and closed it. "I miss the version of you I never knew." It felt like a small mercy to be honest with myself. Aunt Denise sent a letter about forgiveness, the kind of long, syrupy note that tries to reconstruct a past that never existed. I forwarded a copy of the court's stay-away order to her and mailed her own envelope back with no note. Some might call that cruel. I called it necessary. Brianna posted a photo of herself with new friends, smiling like someone who'd chosen her tribe and believed it fully. I hoped the choice would stick for her. I felt the cost: empty places at tables, one less voice reading aloud from a holiday program, but I also felt a clean ache instead of a raw, burning wound. The difference was important. This grief was the loss of the story I'd grown up telling myself, that being useful was my purpose. I mourned that version of family and then let the mourning draw a line. On quiet evenings, I lit a cheap candle, watched the flame, and let the room be as it was, warm, small, and mine. My revenge had never needed witnesses. It needed patience and follow-through. It needed me to be the person who showed up for strangers and did not show up for those who treated love like a ledger. The follow-through changed everything. The phone no longer terrified me. The silence belonged to me, and that, more than any check, more than any public vindication, was the hardest and most necessary victory I'd ever won. Monica slid the papers across her desk with the same quiet efficiency she used for everything. No fanfare, no speeches, just the work. I read the pages once, slowly, the ink cool and final. The language was plain: names of charities, amounts set aside for the kitchen, simple requests for scholarships to stay anonymous. There was one clear line that mattered more than the rest. My family was not listed. Saying that out loud in my head felt like closing a door I'd left cracked for decades. I signed where she asked, initialed where she asked, and handed the pen back. The gravity of it sat in my palms like a smooth stone. Monica offered no judgment, only a small nod and a folder for my copy. I tucked the signed paper into the blue-proof folder, the one that had been armor and ledger, and then I put that folder into a small metal box with a little label, closed. The motion was ordinary, almost gentle. I felt the box's weight in my hands and understood on a bone level that this was more than paperwork. It was a commitment. At home, I set the box on a shelf and ran my thumb across the blue folder's edge one last time before it went in. I put my phone to permanent do not disturb for unknown numbers and kept my contacts deliberately short. The world shrank to the people who showed up without asking for payment. The phone's dark screen felt like a shield I owned, not one someone else controlled. The next morning, I left the old Toyota keys on the counter for Marcus. He hugged me quick and real, said, "We'll use her for deliveries," and drove off before anything could be said about what the car meant. I washed my chipped white mug, watched the small flowers at the bottom of the cup catch the light, and thought about how many mornings it had steadied me. I put it on the shelf like a small trophy for the life I wasn't going to sell. I stood in my doorway, felt the weight of the metal box in my bag, and locked the door without looking back. The house smelled like lemon and quiet. My phone screen lay black on the counter like an honest heart. I breathed in. I breathed out. For the first time in a long while, the life inside those walls felt like mine. If you've had to set a painful boundary to protect yourself, leave a comment and tell your story. Subscribe for more first-person tales like this, and remember, you don't owe anyone your peace.